The stars glimmered silently in the night sky above Soleil Prime, their light casting long shadows across the wheat fields that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Commander Althea Monroe stood at the observation deck of Outpost Sentinel, her eyes fixed on the distant mountain range where the colony's first settlers had established their homes nearly 70 years ago. The outpost itself was nothing remarkable. A collection of prefabricated structures, communication arrays, and a small landing pad for supply shuttles that arrived twice a month from neighboring systems. At 42, Althea had spent most of her adult life in this quiet corner of the galaxy. Her dark hair now carried strands of silver, and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes, souvenirs from years squinting at radar screens and security reports. Yet there remained an alertness in her gaze, a readiness that never quite faded despite the routine nature of her post. "Another quiet night, Commander?" Lieutenant Marcus Hale appeared beside her, his youthful face illuminated by the soft blue glow of his datapad. Althea nodded. "Just the way we like it." But even as she spoke these words, a familiar restlessness stirred within her. Soleil Prime was peaceful. Too peaceful, perhaps. The Galactic Council barely acknowledged their existence, and most star charts marked this region with nothing more than human agricultural settlement, as if their community of 30,000 souls amounted to little more than a footnote in galactic affairs. "You know," Hale continued, "my application to the Central Fleet Academy was rejected again. Said our sector lacks sufficient strategic importance to warrant additional officer training allocations." He tried to mask his disappointment with a chuckle, but Althea heard the frustration beneath. "The Council has always underestimated us," she replied, turning from the window. "Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing." The command center hummed with the quiet efficiency that characterized Soleil Prime. Engineers monitored the colony's power grid, communication specialists maintained contact with the outlying settlements, and security officers tracked the handful of ships that occasionally passed through their system. Most colonists were farmers, scientists, or engineers, people who had deliberately chosen this remote world to escape the politics and conflicts that plagued the more densely populated regions of human space. Naomi Park, the colony's chief engineer, hunched over a workstation in the corner, her attention fixed on schematics that Althea couldn't identify from a distance. Park rarely spoke about her projects, but her innovations had kept Soleil Prime's aging infrastructure functioning well beyond its intended lifespan. "Any progress?" Althea asked, approaching Park Station. The engineer started slightly, then quickly minimized several screens, just refining the modifications to the Starflame. Nothing urgent. The Starflame was technically a survey vessel, though Park had been refining it for years. Althea had authorized the engineer's request for parts and materials without asking too many questions. In a colony this remote, having a ship with capabilities beyond its official designation seemed like a prudent precaution. As night deepened, Althea completed her rounds and retired to her quarters. Through her small window, she could see the vast expanse of stars, distant, indifferent to the small human outpost beneath them. Sometimes she wondered if her role here mattered at all, protecting a colony that most of the galaxy didn't even know existed, fighting for recognition from a council that viewed humans as relatively insignificant newcomers to interstellar affairs. But in those moments of doubt, she would remind herself of the families peacefully sleeping in the settlement below, children who had never known war, scientists free to pursue knowledge for its own sake, farmers connected to the soil of a world that had become truly theirs. If her job was to preserve this quiet corner of tranquility, perhaps that was purpose enough. Little did she know that the stars she gazed upon held secrets that would soon shatter this carefully maintained peace. The first warning came at 0347 hours, when the perimeter sensors registered an unusual disruption in the upper atmosphere. Althea was awakened by the soft but insistent beeping of her communication device. "Monroe here," she answered, instantly alert despite the early hour. "Commander, you need to see this." Lieutenant Hale's voice carried an edge she had never heard before. "Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of our system. Configuration unknown. Within minutes, Althea stood in the command center, watching as the main display filled with red dots, each representing a vessel approaching Soleil Prime. Their formation was unmistakably military. 17, no, 23 ships, Hale reported, his fingers flying across. The console, heavy cruiser class or larger. No identification signals. Open all emergency channels, Althea ordered, her mind racing through protocols that had never been activated outside of drills. Alert the settlement. Begin evacuation procedures for vulnerable sectors. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as officers relayed orders and colonists were roused from their beds. Outside, warning sirens began to wail across the previously peaceful landscape. Getting a transmission from the lead vessel, announced the communications officer, her voice wavering slightly. Putting on screen, the view screen flickered, and Althea found herself staring at an alien face she recognized from security briefings but had never expected to encounter personally. Gray-blue skin stretched taut over sharp facial bones. Eyes like polished obsidian regarded them with cold calculation. This is Overseer Kale Raver of the Zerion Dominion. The figure announced, his voice a deep, modulated sound that seemed to reverberate through the command center. Your settlement occupies a system now claimed by the Dominion. You have 2 standard hours to surrender all resources, technology, and pledge fealty to the Dominion. Resistance will result in your immediate eradication. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. The Zerions, even in this remote sector, their reputation preceded them. A species whose empire expanded through ruthless conquest, whose technological superiority was matched only by their absolute conviction of their right to rule. They had clashed with human outposts before, but never this far from the central systems. They think we're just a helpless colony, Hale muttered, breaking the silence. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Althea wished she shared his confidence. Soleil Prime's defenses consisted of an outdated planetary shield, a handful of security officers, and whatever weapons the colonists had brought with them. Against a Zerion battle fleet, their chances were negligible. Contact any Earth vessels within range, she ordered. Alert Central Command about the situation. Already tried, Hale responded grimly. They're jamming long-range communications. We're on our own. Park, who had been silently analyzing the sensor readings, suddenly looked up. Not necessarily, she said, her eyes bright with a determination Althea hadn't seen before. The Starflame's modifications are complete. It has stealth capabilities the Zerions won't expect, and I've installed an experimental communications array that might break through their jamming. 1 ship against 23? Althea questioned, though a desperate plan was already forming in her mind. We don't need to defeat them, Park explained. We just need to get a message out. As they spoke, the first shots were fired. A Zerion destroyer launched a warning volley that struck an uninhabited area 20 kilometers from the main settlement. The ground shook, and through the command center windows, Althea could see a plume of smoke and dirt rising on the horizon, a stark demonstration of what awaited them if they resisted. For a brief moment, Althea considered surrender. Perhaps they could negotiate terms that would spare the colonists' lives. But everything she knew about the Zerions suggested otherwise. They didn't conquer to rule. They conquered to exploit and discard. Activate all defensive protocols, she decided, her voice finding new strength. Lieutenant Hale, coordinate with settlement security. Engineer Park, prepare the Starflame for immediate launch. She paused, then added, and find me Captain Hayes. Hale's eyes widened slightly. Adrian Hayes? The recluse who lives in the Eastern Highlands. Althea nodded. If anyone can pilot that ship through a Zerion blockade, it's him. Captain Adrian Hayes had once been a legend among Earth's defense forces before retiring to Soleil Prime 5 years ago. He had sought solitude, and the colonists had respected his privacy. Now, they would need to call upon the skills he had hoped to leave behind. As the command center mobilized, Althea found herself standing alone for a moment, watching the Zerion ships drawing ever closer on the display. In her heart, she knew they were outmatched. But something deeper than logic told her that this small colony, this insignificant human settlement, would not fall today. The Zarians had made a critical error in their calculations. They thought they were attacking just a colony. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The next 6 hours unfolded in a blur of activity as Soleil Prime prepared for what many feared would be their last stand. The planetary shield, never tested in actual combat, hummed to life, creating a faint blue shimmer in the atmosphere visible even in daylight. Colonists transformed agricultural equipment into makeshift barricades. Those with military experience organized defense units, while others prepared emergency medical stations. Captain Adrian Hayes arrived at the command center with little fanfare, a tall, weathered man whose quiet demeanor belied the intensity in his eyes. His once-regulation haircut had grown out, and a scar ran along his left jawline, a souvenir from battles fought long ago. "It's been a while, Althea," he said simply, as if they were meeting for a scheduled appointment rather than in the midst of an invasion. 5 years, 3 months, she replied. Their history, once complicated by rank and regulations, hung unspoken between them. "We need you to fly the Starflame." Hayes studied the tactical display without comment, taking in the overwhelming odds they faced. Parts modifications? Extensive. Althea gestured to the engineer, who approached with a data tablet. Reinforced hull plating, enhanced shield generators, and a propulsion system that can achieve speeds most vessels this size can't match. Park explained, her words coming rapidly. The communications array is experimental, quantum entanglement technology that theoretically can't be jammed. And, she hesitated, glancing at Althea, before continuing, "I've installed prototype weapons systems that aren't in any registry." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Illegal modifications? Let's call them undocumented innovations," Park replied with a hint of defiance. The Zarians had maintained their position at the edge of the system, their ultimatum now expired. Whether they were surprised by the activation of Soleil Prime's shield or simply enjoying the colonists' fear, they had yet to launch a full-scale attack. "Their formation has a weakness," Hayes noted, studying the display. "Their command ship is protected, but if we can slip through this gap between their destroyer screen, we might be able to transmit a distress signal from behind their lines. And pray that someone hears it," Hale added grimly. Hayes turned to the lieutenant, his expression unreadable. "In my experience, Lieutenant, prayer is rarely necessary. Earth doesn't abandon its own." The statement hung in the air, a reminder of something the colonists had begun to doubt after years of neglect from the central systems. "The ship is ready when you are, Captain," Park said, breaking the silence. Hayes nodded once. "I'll need a co-pilot." "That would be me," came a voice from the doorway. A woman with cropped blonde hair and the steady gaze of a veteran stepped forward. "Mira Vega, former tactical officer, 3rd Fleet. I've been growing soybeans for the past decade, but I haven't forgotten how to fly." Hayes acknowledged her with a nod of recognition that suggested their paths had crossed before. As preparations for the Starflame's launch continued, the Zarians finally moved. 3 destroyers broke formation, advancing towards Soleil Prime with weapons charged. "They're testing our shield," Althea observed as the command center's sensors tracked the approaching vessels. The first barrage struck the planetary shield with blinding intensity. The entire command center shuddered, and for a terrifying moment, Althea thought the shield had failed. But the readings showed it holding, barely. "Shield integrity at 78%, reported the defense officer. "Another hit like that. They're recalibrating their weapons," Hayes noted, watching the enemy ship's movements with the practiced eye of a combat veteran. "We need to launch now, while they're focused on the shield." Althea made her decision. "Launch the Starflame. Lieutenant Hale, coordinate with settlement defense. When the shield fails, we need to be ready for ground resistance." As Hayes and Vega departed for the launching bay, Althea caught Hayes' arm. "Adrian, this isn't a suicide mission. Get the message out and come back." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps surprise at her concern or recognition of the slim odds of return. "Some things are worth the risk, Commander," he said quietly. The Zerion destroyers fired again, their energy weapons striking the shield with even greater force. This time, the impact was followed by alarm sirens throughout the command center. "Shield integrity at 42%, shouted the defense officer. "We can't take another hit like that." On the displays, Althea watched as the small shape of the Starflame rose from its concealed hangar, its engines glowing with an unusual blue-white light. One of Park's undocumented innovations. Starflame launching now. Hayes' voice came through the communication system. Engaging stealth systems. The ship's signature on their sensors diminished until it was barely distinguishable from background radiation. Another of Park's modifications that might just give them a fighting chance. As the Zerion destroyers prepared for another volley against the weakening shield, a sudden alert flashed on their tactical display. The enemy ships were changing direction, their sensors, apparently detecting something their commanders deemed a greater threat than the planetary defense. "They've spotted the Starflame," Hale said with dismay. But Althea realized something else was happening. No, they're not pursuing the Starflame. They're regrouping. Indeed, the Zerion vessels were pulling back into a defensive formation around their command ship, their attention diverted from Soleil Prime. "What are they doing?" Hale asked, confusion evident in his voice. Before Althea could respond, Park called out from her station, "I'm detecting massive energy readings from the Zerion command ship. They're powering up some kind of weapon system I've never seen before." Althea felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. If the Zerions had decided to deploy a planet-killer weapon rather than waste time with conventional attacks, their shield would offer no protection at all. "Starflame, be advised," she transmitted urgently. "The enemy is preparing to deploy an unknown weapon system. Abort mission and take evasive action." Hayes' response came back calm, but strained. "Negative, Command. We're continuing as planned. Whatever they're charging up will take time. We can make it through their line before it's ready." On the tactical display, the Starflame accelerated toward the gap in the Zerion formation that Hayes had identified earlier. Two enemy frigates moved to intercept, firing warning shots that the small vessel managed to evade with maneuvers that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. "Park, what did you do to that engine?" Althea asked, watching the Starflame perform a tight spiral that left the pursuing Zerion vessels firing at empty space. "Theoretical physics made practical," the engineer replied with a hint of pride despite the dire circumstances. "The Starflame can briefly phase shift its mass during acceleration." The Zerion command ship continued its ominous power buildup as the Starflame wove through the enemy formation, taking hits but somehow maintaining its course. Hayes and Vega were flying with a coordination that spoke of years of combat experience, anticipating each other's moves without need for communication. Then, suddenly, the Starflame was past the enemy line and accelerating into open space beyond the Zerion fleet. "We're clear," Hayes reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Deploying communications array now. Transmitting distress signal on all Earth frequencies." For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then Vega's voice came through, excitement breaking through her professional demeanor. "Confirmation received. Signal acknowledged." A cheer erupted in the command center, but Althea's relief was short-lived. On the display, the Zerion command ship's energy readings had reached critical levels. "Incoming fire," Hayes shouted over the comm. "Massive energy weapon." The transmission cut off as a blinding beam lands from the Zerion command ship, striking the Starflame directly. For a horrifying moment, Althea thought the small vessel had been vaporized. But as the energy dissipated, the ship remained, damaged but intact, another testament to Park's modifications. "Starflame, report status," Althea demanded, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the console. Static crackled, then still. "Here," Hayes responded, his voice strained. "Vega's injured. Shields failed. Hull breaches on decks 2 and 3. But the signal got through. Return to Soleil Prime immediately," Althea ordered. "We'll provide what cover we can." "Negative," came the reply. "They'll just follow us back. We'll lead them away from the colony." Before Althea could argue. The tactical display lit up with new alerts. The Zerion vessels were breaking formation, their attention now fixed entirely on the damaged Starflame as it limped away from Soleil Prime. What are they doing? Hale wondered aloud. Why abandon the attack on the colony to chase one ship? Because they know what that transmission means, Althea realized, a new hope rising within her. They know what's coming. As if in confirmation of her words, the long-range sensors began registering new energy signatures at the edge of the system. One at first, then 5, then dozens, then hundreds, too many to count as they continued to appear. Hyperspace ruptures detected, the sensor officer announced, his voice rising in disbelief. Multiple vessels emerging. I can't even count them all. The display, designed to track ships within the system, began to falter under the sheer number of new signatures appearing. The edge of the screen filled with blue markers, the color designated for Earth vessels, until they formed an unbroken mass that stretched beyond the sensor range. My God, Hale whispered. Is that the United Earth Fleet? Althea confirmed, a mixture of awe and vindication in her voice. All of it. The first vessels to fully materialize from hyperspace were massive dreadnoughts, each larger than the entire Zerion fleet combined. Behind them came battlecruisers, destroyers, frigates, and countless smaller vessels, all bearing the emblem of Earth, a planet with a single star behind it, symbol of humanity's home and its reach into the stars. The Zerion fleet, moments ago so threatening, now appeared tiny and isolated against this overwhelming force. Their vessels turned, abandoning their pursuit of the Starflame and attempting to reform into a defensive posture. A transmission cut through all channels, overriding even the Zerion communications jamming with ease. This is Grand Admiral Kirasalis of the United Earth Fleet, announced a commanding female voice as the image of a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked black hair appeared on screens throughout the command center. Zerion vessels, power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any hostile action will be met with immediate and decisive force. For a moment, it seemed the Zerions might defy the order. Their command ship oriented toward the lead Earth dreadnought, its weapons still hot from the shot that had nearly destroyed the Starflame. They wouldn't dare, Hale breathed. The Zerion command ship fired, a desperate act of defiance against the overwhelming force before them. The energy beam that had so damaged the Starflames struck the dreadnought's shields and dissipated harmlessly, like rain against a window. The Earth Fleet's response was swift and devastating. Multiple dreadnoughts fired simultaneously, their weapons precisely targeting the Zerion vessel's propulsion and weapon systems. Within seconds, half the Zerion fleet was disabled, floating helplessly in space. Only then did Overseer Raver transmit again, his earlier arrogance replaced by barely controlled fury. This is an unprovoked act of aggression against the Zerion Dominion. Your colony violated our territorial claims. The consequences will. Admiral Salas cut the transmission off mid-sentence. Your threats are meaningless, Overseer. The Zerion Dominion has no claim to this system or any other inhabited by humans. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. This colony exists under Earth protection, as do all human settlements throughout the galaxy. Remember that before you threaten what is ours again. The remaining Zerion vessels, recognizing the futility of resistance, powered down their weapons. Earth frigates moved in to secure them, while medical ships approached the damaged Starflame. In the command center of Soleil Prime, a stunned silence gave way to cheers and embraces as the colonists realized they had survived what had seemed like certain destruction. Althea found herself gripping Hale's shoulder with one hand and Parks with the other, unable to find words adequate for the moment. The United Earth Fleet, the full might of humanity's military power, rarely seen assembled in such numbers, had come to the defense of what the galaxy had dismissed as just a colony. And in doing so, they had sent a message that would resonate across the stars. Humanity stood united, and those who threatened even its most distant children would face the wrath of the whole. The days following the Zerion retreat were filled with a strange mixture of celebration and solemn reflection. Earth vessels maintained a protective formation around Soleil Prime as recovery efforts began. The Starflame returned to the colony, its hull scarred but its crew, Hayes and Vega, alive, if wounded. Althea found Hayes in the medical facility, his right arm in a stabilization field and patches of synthetic skin covering burns along his neck and shoulder. Vega occupied a bed nearby, her injuries more severe but not life-threatening. "You disobeyed a direct order," Althea said as she approached his bedside, her tone serious despite the slight curve of her lips. "Would you believe I had interference on the comm?" Hayes replied, wincing as he attempted to sit up straighter. "Not for a second." She sat beside him, her expression softening. "But I'll overlook it this once, considering you helped save 30,000 lives." Beyond the medical facility's windows, Earth shuttles continued to arrive, bringing supplies, technical assistance, and reinforcements for the colony's defenses. The United Earth Fleet's arrival had transformed Soleil Prime overnight from a forgotten outpost to a strategic priority. "I never thought I'd see the Grand Fleet assembled like that again," Hayes said, his gaze distant. "Not since the Proxima Centauri campaign." "None of us expected it," Althea admitted. "After years of being treated as an afterthought by Central Command, I'd begun to believe they really had forgotten about us." Hayes shook his head. Earth never forgot. They were just waiting, watching to see who would make the first move against their outer colonies. A grim satisfaction crossed his features. The Zerions played right into their hands. Later that afternoon, Grand Admiral Solace herself landed at Soleil Prime for a formal meeting with colony leadership. In person, she was even more imposing than her transmissions suggested, tall and straight-backed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. "Commander Monroe," she greeted Althea with a firm handshake. "Your colony's resistance against overwhelming odds was remarkable. Earth acknowledges your service." "We simply did what was necessary to survive, Admiral," Althea responded. "The real question is how the entire United Earth Fleet happened to be within response range of our distress call." A smile flickered across Solace's otherwise stern features. "Let's discuss that privately." In Althea's office, with only Hayes and Lieutenant Hale present, the Admiral revealed what had truly transpired. "The Zerion incursion wasn't unexpected," Solace explained, studying a holographic display of the surrounding star systems. "Intelligence had detected their fleet movements for months. They've been probing human territories, testing our responses." "You used us as bait," Hayes said flatly, his injured arm still suspended in the stabilization field. Solace regarded him coolly. "We positioned assets strategically, Captain. There's a difference." Soleil Prime was never abandoned. The fleet was assembled in the neighboring sector, waiting for the Zerions to commit to an attack. "And if our defenses had failed before your arrival?" Althea asked, unable to keep an edge from her voice. "If they had simply bombarded us from orbit?" "That was never their intention," Solace responded. "The Zerions don't want to destroy potential resources. They want to subjugate and control. Their standard procedure is to intimidate, then occupy." She gestured to the hologram, where dozens of similar star systems were highlighted. "They've been doing the same throughout this quadrant, targeting isolated colonies of various species. We needed them to commit to a major action against a human settlement to justify our response." "Justified to whom?" Hale asked. "The Galactic Council," Solace said with a hint of disdain. "For too long, they've dismissed humanity as a minor power, scattered across too many worlds to defend effectively. The Zerions believed that propaganda as well." Her expression hardened. Yesterday changed that perception permanently. The revelation that they had been part of a larger strategy didn't sit entirely well with Althea, but she couldn't argue with the results. The Zerion threat had been neutralized, and Soleil Prime would receive the recognition and protection it deserved from Earth. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Solace said, deactivating the hologram, "Soleil Prime becomes the cornerstone of Earth's new defensive posture in this sector. We're establishing a permanent fleet presence here and upgrading your defenses. No one will dismiss this colony as insignificant again." After the admiral departed, Althea found herself once again on the observation deck, where she had stood with Hale just days before, when Soleil Prime had been nothing more than a quiet agricultural settlement on the edge of known space. Now, Earth vessels filled the sky, their running lights visible even in daylight as they patrolled the system. Hayes joined her, moving carefully with his injuries still healing. "Quite a view," he commented, standing beside her. "It's hard to believe this is the same place," she admitted. "Everything's changed." "Not everything," Hayes countered. "The people are the same. The fields still need tending. Children still need teaching." Althea smiled at the unexpected philosophy from the hardened captain. "And security still needs maintaining," she added. "Though I suspect my job just became more complicated. Planning to request a transfer now that we're a strategic cornerstone?" Hayes asked, studying her profile. She shook her head without hesitation. "This is my home. These people are my responsibility." After a pause, she added, "What about you? Now that the fleet's here, you could return to active service if you wanted." Hayes looked out at the vessels patrolling above Soleil Prime. "I came here for peace and quiet," he said wryly. "That didn't work out as planned." "You could try another colony," Althea suggested, surprised by how much she hoped he wouldn't. "I think I'll stay," he decided. "Someone needs to help train your security forces to meet these new expectations. Besides," he added with the ghost of a smile, "I've put too much work into my garden to abandon it now." In the distance, a new shuttle descended toward the colony. More personnel, more equipment, more changes. Soleil Prime would never again be the forgotten outpost it once was. But as Althea watched the colonists going about their work below, children playing in the settlement plaza, engineers repairing the damaged sections of the shield generators, she knew that what mattered most remained unchanged. The Zarions had thought they were attacking just a colony, an isolated, vulnerable settlement they could easily subjugate. Instead, they had awakened the full might of humanity, a united force that spanned hundreds of worlds and would defend even its most distant citizens with overwhelming power. As the sun began to set over Soleil Prime, casting long shadows across the fields where generations of colonists had built their lives, Althea Monroe understood something that the Zarions, and perhaps even the Galactic Council, had failed to grasp. Humanity's strength had never been in its central worlds or its largest fleets. It lay in its unity, in the unspoken but unbreakable bond between its scattered children among the stars. They had thought it was just a colony. They had been gloriously, catastrophically wrong.